Alright, you might be able to see me a little bit better than how I was. Uh, okay, I don't feel so great right now. I've been sick for the past, well, it's been getting worse. Today is like kind of bad in some ways and better in others. But for the past few days, I've been looking into, so if you don't know, I was actually planning on writing a book about Bitcoin. And Bitcoin's like, I've been looking really in depth into the financial theories of it and trying to understand fundamentally, like, yeah, well, I already do understand. Basically, I'm trying to understand the arguments against it so I can write a book about trying to persuade people that, like, this isn't a scam. In fact, this is the way out of government-controlled money, and to make sure that ordinary people are able to save their money properly, because inflation is just straight up theft. It's like the worst. It funds the worst projects of government, and it props up most of the modern wars. And so, like, there's so much human tragedy that occurs. On top of it, it just keeps people poor. So it drives people to make very short-term decisions because you can't save money well. And so it's just, society is just ruined by this fiat nonsense, and it's motivated mostly by these leftist economists, and it promotes all sorts of just social ills. So like rapid sexual perversion is also caused by this. The general belief the world's somehow going to end due to global warming, these sorts of things, all very linked to these monetary policies that are promoted by, well, the United States and also the European powers. So it's like, right, Bitcoin's actually a solution that'll work. Like, there's a reason gold hasn't reclaimed things against fiat. There's a reason why fiat was victorious over gold. And I think if you want a book on this, there's the Fiat Standard written by Saifuddin Amos. He also wrote Bitcoin Standard, which is a great book, but it is a little bit, the later chapters are a little bit hesitant. He's like basically the book ends where he's like, yeah, I'm like 95% certain Bitcoin will work out, but he wasn't sure because it's 2017 at the time when he wrote it. But 70% of that book is just about literally the history of money. Like, it doesn't even talk about Bitcoin for the majority of the book. So it's a really good book on just monetary theory itself. And anyway, so I was like looking at this, and then I realized that he was a monarchist, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I started looking into it, and I've always had a little bit of like a, not really soft spot as much as it's like, I've always not really understood why the rule of law should be followed. I'm like, laws are mostly stupid. Like, most laws are really dumb. Like, what's the point of following, if I know for a fact a law was not thought out, it's not enforced well, and it's just, what's the point of me following it? And I mean, like, yeah, most of these laws you can get away with not following, and it's just the nature of, like, the amount of laws in existence and ordinances. I think most Americans probably break well over 50 a day, if not more. If you're a more powerful person, like you run a company or anything else, or an officer in a company, you're probably breaking like a few hundred every day. And the difference is like, well, why aren't you punished? It's like, well, in the Anglican tradition of law, most laws are never appealed. They just go out of the consciousness of the public. Like, if no officer enforces them, if no judge will even hear a case against you because of the law, and no one's going to try you in court for it. And so at the end of the day, those laws are deceased. No one's going to use them. So laws are on the books, or like saying that they've been passed, but they're just so old no one cares anymore. So in that sense, laws do go away. And so it's why people, I think that's the main flaw in the Anglican system of law, but at least it's better than the European system, because the European system of like having a clear code is just, it assumes too much on the part of the people making the laws. It's like the common law system comes from the idea that, like, okay, every case will sort of just decide when it comes up, because the chances that we'll get something right by having some overarching philosophy, it's pretty low. And so we'll just be like, okay, well, this one case has come up and it's been brought to court, and once we make a decision, we'll, like, sort of formulate a legal code over these several different cases that do occur. And so that way the law reflects a much more realistic outlook on what can and cannot be enforced. I mean, obviously at the very, foundations of judgment, you need some worldview, and this has always been informed by, a religious mindset at the end of the day. And so you look at like early England, and also like other Scandinavian Germanic countries before they adopted the Roman system. They all had case law, but they're all Catholic, and I'm like, this seems like a good system. You have the Catholic ideas of, what's right and wrong at the basis of your legal system, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to what, the local society's thinking like is actually a good rule or not. Does it actually promote good? Because it's not always clear, and maybe a law promotes good at one time and doesn't promote something the other time. Like some laws are, temporal, others are eternal, and there's a difference between these types of laws. Like rules that are very specific and not very fundamental tend to be, temporal, and they probably should be changed. Are we still rolling? Nope, that's the wrong thing, really. Yep, it looks like we're still going. 7 minutes into the video. I'll edit it a little bit, maybe. Okay, if I sniffle, I'm sorry if that's coming too much up on the audio. Like I said, I've been sick. Anyway, so then I got into some monarchist guys, like arguments for monarchy, because I think this is actually fundamentally, the Catholic understanding of the universe is that it is a monarchy, and that there are difference in stature, and then when we're in heaven, if we get to heaven, which you should get to heaven, everyone can go to heaven, but you gotta work. You gotta make sure that you don't commit mortal sin. If you commit your mortal sin, you gotta go to confession. Sorry, my nose is very runny here. So you gotta make sure that you are keeping in the good graces of God. That will mean that you will get to heaven, but spending less time in purgatory is probably a good idea. So you want to, because here's the thing: even if you're forgiven by God, you have to pay for your sins. Just because you're forgiven doesn't mean that you haven't. You have to pay for the consequences of your sin, because by you sinning, it causes ailments in the world. It causes evil to exist, and that has to be redeemed in some fashion. So this is why you end up in purgatory. So like the person that's murdered, like I don't know, like a guy like Jeffrey Dahmer, right? He supposedly converted to Christianity. I don't know what sect he converted to, but he did have a baptism a few months before he died. So I mean, any baptism is legitimate regardless of what sect you are, and you can be a pagan and baptize someone. So at the end of the day, the question's like, well, I guess at that moment you've been bestowed grace, and I guess if he hadn't committed any more serious sins, he could in theory be in purgatory right now. And he was murdered in prison by some guy who had some severe mental illness, who probably was hearing demons, honestly. But Jeffrey Dahmer was worshiping Satan. So, and this is why he killed all these people. It's why he engaged in homosexuality, and it's why he ate some of them. And he made an altar out of the skulls of his victims to Satan. So I think the fact he repented, I think he always believed in God in some capacity, which is why he worshipped the devil. He actually was fearful of God in the end. If he hadn't been caught, I don't know if he would have converted. This is why when Pope Francis is condemning, the death penalty, I'm like, look, I don't think the death penalty should be for your average person that's most murders are within the family, or there was somebody who's known, and there's a direct gain, right, associated with it, right? They're convinced hey, I'll gain. There's a motivation, right, for the murder. But then there's some people that are just absolutely vile, and they just do it to promote evil itself. There's no earthly benefit for it except that they are literally sadistic. Somebody goes ahead and rapes and tortures little girls and then butchers them, or some person who shoots up a school with full of little kids. These people should not be given they should not be given any benefit of, hopefully, of re-entering society. I don't want them to ever be in society, and these people should not be given a chance. If you, I don't know, it's still horrible, but if you killed like somebody, just one person, or whatever, for gain of some kind, I can see you repenting, and maybe in like 30-50 years I could see us letting you out, assuming you're young enough. I guess you could be let out of prison at some point. I could see you repenting for what you've done, but the people like school shooters, that these people are not, they need to be punished. And the only way I see them repenting is honestly through, there's I forget which saint said this, but said, I want to say it was Aquinas, but I think it might not be, who said that, hanging concentrates the mind wonderfully. It's like, oh, well, shit, I'm going to die next week or whatever. And it's like, what? Maybe I should make my peace with God. Maybe I should. Maybe there's a reason why I'm being punished. And so, there's these ideas floating around in my mind right now. Anyways, what were we talking about? Monarchy. So, rule of law being fundamentally not super legitimate in a lot of ways. And I'm like, well, I think, can a monarch be legitimate? I'm like, yes, if they are an emissary of God for the governing body. Because the thing is that the whole point of government, the entire purpose of government, is to create justice, to enact justice in an unjust world, because our world's fallen and injustice pervades it all the time. And so we need a governing body to, actually create justice. And, the question is like, especially in our republics these days, it's like people don't even know what is good and evil. So how can you know what's just and unjust? It's like, this is fun. I think that if you do not have a person that is trying to keep the government holy, there's no way it can actually do its function. It'll forget about actually doing justice and then try posing like, injustice. It'll try promoting vice, which is what you see so many governments do these days, and including our own. And this is not good. And so then you start hearing arguments for monarchy that, like, look, there's a higher incentive structure. There's way better incentives if you're the executive, the supreme executive that inherits this position. You can make way long-term decisions, which is much better. You hear this argument for the Communist Party of China, which the Communist Party of China is just fully wicked and evil, obviously. But they are right in that there is less disagreement with a single-party state. I don't think a single-party state is a good idea. Necessarily, because obviously a single party does not have the benefit of having to actually, when you have one side arguing another, you can seek the truth a lot easier. Not because you end up in the middle, because the middle is not where truth lies. Truth often is at the extremes. But if something's truthful and it's argued in a very legitimate body, then the truth tends to emerge victorious. So it's like, otherwise, if it's like not being argued against, you get things that are like mostly true and not fully true. And these that's not what you want. There's a good argument that a proper structure would be, you'd have the monarch at the top of your government, who would be, directly influenced by the Pope. He'd probably be crowned by the Pope in all goodness. That would probably be the way to do it. And then you'd have some sort of house that was your nobility. And the reason why you want a nobility that's also hereditary is because you don't want there will always be rich people, right? You don't want these oligarchical figures that control industry, which fundamentally is necessary for livelihoods, but you don't want them to be organizing and bribing all your politicians. And so you want a very strong body that is their wealth is so secure and their positions are secure that they don't need anything to, they can't be influenced. And so they're much more concerned with the goings on of the state itself, that they want to promote the long-term interest of the good of the state against foreign entities, and also, issues internally. So that's why you want you might say, an aristocratic body that is, fundamentally governing. But of course, you don't want only them, because they can also, just as it happened in Russia, where you can have these oligarchical figures that tend to expropriate the people that don't have this institutional power. Mind you, before I go into that, you should probably talk about the fact that most societies that will have an aristocracy like this, they won't be the richest men in the society. There will be lots of wealthy people that are not enshrined in power, that have lots of influence, and they fundamentally are good for society, like industrialists. So they can have way more money, and than the nobility themselves. But the difference is that they're not secure in their power. If they were to be elected or whatever, at the end of the day, they have to always worry about the very short term. So they don't have that long-term outlook. And also, because their wealth is not very secure, there's a high chance that their heirs will squander their fortunes, which is just inevitably what happens with the majority of wealthy people, is that you look like 3 generations down and no one has any money. Like, look at the Vanderbilts. The Rockefellers are different. They're wise and they actually invested their money properly. Generally speaking, they taught their kids good morals when it comes to monetary things. Now, obviously, not all the Rockefellers were great people. Some of them did some not so great things, and especially against the Catholics. But overall, if you want to look at John Rockefeller, was an interesting guy if you want to look into what he did. So he always had the good claim that it's not money precisely that's the root of all evil, but he firmly believed it was the love of money above anything else that was the root of evil. And that, if you only love money, then you won't make it anywhere in the world. And this is why, he became so wealthy, primarily is because he cared very much about the customer experience. Everyone's like, oh, well, look, he bought up all these other things. But I'm like, guys, the point of the entire point of industry is, who gives a shit about your competitors? Okay, it's all about the customer. Like, at the end of the day, the entire point of a company is to create a legal entity which job is to create the right incentive structures to produce a particular thing. And it's like, it really doesn't matter if they're the only ones doing it, as long as they are doing it in such a way that is beneficial to the end consumer. And it's like, okay, sure, if they don't have anybody competing against, they'll eventually grow complacent and they won't change. But until somebody comes along to change that, then, and it doesn't matter, it's still better than the alternative. And so I say there's lots of modern day monopolies that are perfectly good to the population as a whole, but no one says anything like, oh yeah, these are bad. I'm like, well, objectively they have a very dominant position in society, and this is just inevitably what happens with new technology, is certain groups are just so much better than everyone else that they end up just sort of being in charge of 80-90% of the entire market. And that's fine, because everyone uses them because they're better, and removing them from those positions would be detrimental to society. But either way, the general point though is that you want an aristocracy so that is it won't be influenced by new money, basically, is the main idea. And that their positions are relatively secure, so they can have long-term, they'll look for the long-term good of the state instead of, the short-term reaping of benefits for their own prosperity. And then you want, of course, representation from everyone else who is not in these institutionally imposed, things. So you want some form of election for representatives in a second body that will, be able to petition the king or the monarch to whatever policies they think is good. But obviously, at the end of the day, the monarch has a say in the matter, and obviously the aristocracy also has a say. But this way, everyone has a say, but ultimately the state is governed in a much more long-term thinking manner, and they're not generally trying to enrich themselves. You can probably easily enumerate the powers these people would have. Maybe make sure that there is a very fixed amount of taxation that the monarch can impose on the citizenry for the state. The military probably should probably only be funded at the discretion of the populace, because otherwise the monarch would be able to have a standing army constantly. And this is actually one of the main reasons why England was a lot more free than the rest of Europe. They didn't have to worry about a standing army because they're an island, which is nice. But whenever the king wanted to make a war, he would have to raise money from Parliament, which I think is overall a good thing, although in England it may have gone too far with certain issues, which is actually what this video is about. So basically, after looking into monarchy and some other stuff, I found this channel, Defeat Modernism. It's a good channel, but some of his videos, I think he goes too far. He basically claims that Vatican II is completely illegitimate, which I'm like, look, here's the thing. I know I have grown up with so many priests in my life, and I know for a fact these people are priests, okay? They're validly ordained. I've seen miracles occur, and I can tell you foremost that yes, there are problems in the church. Okay, I know people that have left certain orders. They didn't break their vows, because they did the first ones were temporary, and then they have later ones. And so one of my good friends, he left because of so many issues. And I know so many seminarians that ended up not becoming priests for various reasons or another. And I'm not going to say that there are issues, because there are, but I'm not going to say that the line of bishops is secure. So this is my main issue with this man. He, I made a comment recently to this guy, and, I asked him, I'm like, look, the Eucharist is demons are definitely reacting to these hosts. I have heard so many different testimonies of exorcists still being able to exorcise demons. And if they weren't, then you would probably hear about it, because then you wouldn't hear about the stories you wouldn't hear the testimonies of people that have been exorcised. So, that would, I don't see how, and I also know of Eucharistic miracles from priests that I definitely trust their testimony, and you can hear it. When you hear a true testimony, like, certain people saying, like, near-death experiences, some of them are just so bullshit. You're like, okay, this guy is just making this up to say something, and you're like, this guy is not right. And some people are like, oh, some stories are just like, okay, this is definitely true. Like, I can tell you're telling the truth here. And you can have good judgment. You can always pray to God and ask for guidance on these matters. But he made a really good video on JP2 being not a saint. And it was a 3-part series. Where is it at? This was a good one. The story of like 1858, I think, was a possession of these 2 children. Good story. I found it interesting just how long it took the church to actually exorcise them, just because at the time they didn't have great communication always, and so it took a little time for the church to get the right exorcist on board to actually exorcise these demons. But in the meantime, the demons' tauntings are rather interesting. They reveal quite a lot about the French Revolution being fundamentally driven by the Jacobins, which were Satanists. Some of them were explicitly Satanists. Other ones were just doing highly influential, things that were influenced by Satan. The French idea of like liberty, equality, and brotherhood they're just demonic. I mean, like those phrases are with the idea that they don't need God. They'll create a state not built on the state of God and the approval of the church, but rather will do it based on man's approval. And as if you couldn't find liberty, as if liberty from sin wasn't the entire point, as if we don't live in an equal world. There are, like, in heaven you will have a place dependent upon your holiness. Like, you're not going to be in heaven, you will get a seat at the table, the big wedding banquet, and your seat will be in proximity to Christ in context to how holy you were in this life. And you can get to heaven, but you might have had to spend all of time in purgatory. And at least at the end of the day you get to be in heaven, but you might have a pretty low place in heaven, but at least it's heaven, right? So like, and it's like very clear that Christ gives certain orders to different people. And if you ever hear the parable of talents, which is a great parable, we did it at my grandfather's funeral, and that you see, here's the thing. For me, I come from a family that's very well off. My family has made lots of money, and my grandfather came from a little poor farming family, and I know he told me his story of how he decided to go to college after being in the Marines, and listening to him and how he learned to sell himself in terms of how to promote himself. He was an insurance salesman for a while, and then he became an investment manager. So he would manage people's life savings, and from very wealthy clients, obviously, like people who made a lot of money, and they wanted to make sure that they secured their money for their old years and also their kin. And my grandfather was very good at explaining to average people, well, I don't say average people who not financially inclined. Just because you make a lot of money doesn't mean you have any idea how to store it or these other things. And like I said, lots of times people tend to waste their fortunes that they make. And in this country, where we are generally good at creating free institutions, at least in terms of making useful things for other people, and there's so many people in this country that one person who makes something very useful for lots of people will become very wealthy indeed. And this is just compensation. It's like, effectively in this country, the billionaire is worth billions because he's improved the lives of those he has served by billions. Generally speaking, some people are scumbags and they have rigged the system in favor of them, but I'd say the majority of people are decent. But ultimately, we had this parable about the talents, which is like, actually no, we didn't do the talents one. That's a very similar one. I've given a speech on that before. We did the 10 virgins. I think it's 10 virgins. Basically, both stories account for you should be prudent and invest. Of course, in Christ, he's talking about invest in heaven, like be vigilant. Christ will give you. Well, God has given you exactly what you need, and he expects you to then multiply it like fruit. So he gives talents as a currency. In English, this sort of works out as well, because talent also means like what you're talented at, what you're gifted at. And so he gives you gifts, or in this case, context of that parable, it's about money to his servants. And one servant gives him back. He was given 2 of these talents, and he gave him back 4. The guy who had 10 gives him back another 10 plus the 10 he already was given. And the one that was given 1 was foolish and was scared about not being able to give back, so he buried it in the ground to make sure it was safe. And he's like, you fool, you at least could have put this talent into a bank and I could have gotten interest off of this. And so it's like the way that grace is distributed is he gives you grace, and your job as a holy man or woman is to then give that out to the world. It's like the saints are supposed to be luminous, depending on their holiness in the next life, depending on how much of the grace they gave off. How reflective of God are you? While the damned are supposed to be black because all the grace that they received, they gave none of it out. And so in this context as well with wealth, is that at the end of the day, wealth is supposed to be you are supposed to be only a manager of it, and God could take it all away from you at any given time. Look at the book of Job. So don't think you're so high and mighty as to be because you happen to have wealth and influence. This is all because of God. So, at the end of the day, you gotta be vigilant here. But yeah, so I don't remember why I started talking about this. It's been a little while. Anyways, yeah, so this is the series on JP2, and it really revealed a lot of questions I've always had, which is that Vatican II clearly has had extreme issues, and it caused a lot of issues. I know currently a lot of priests that I've grown up with have talked about how they watched so many people leave, not when they were running things, but when people before them running. And so obviously these are more middle-aged guys, not the older ones. The older guys, I find most of them were all way too influenced by Vatican II's. And this was not accidental. And a lot of people say, like, oh, it was misinterpreted. No. This was intentionally designed. Now, what I highly disagree with, though, with this YouTuber, is that he says that, he says basically that the line of bishops is broken. I mean, if he's right, the Vatican II no longer allows people to be ordained properly, well, then the church is broken. There is no church now. It's been almost 60 years since this has occurred, which means that there has to be almost no bishops left that were ordained properly, which means that no bishops could then properly, revitalize the church. Like, who's left at this point? I mean, even if you go to Latin Mass, that Mass is being said by a bishop that was almost certainly ordained under the new ordination practices. So, and like I said, I know for a fact these ordinations are valid just from my own experiences and testimonies, and also experiences of just witnessing. It's like there's no way the church is that destroyed. If this is correct, all these people that I know for a fact are faithful and holy are somehow being deceived. And I mean, it's possible that to some degree, and I fully agree that the examples of JP2 here, like, I mean, he was a little deceptive towards the end right here. I mean, like this one bit right here where he shows image right here. This actually was not directly after his death. I'm sorry, my nose is leaking again. Oh, good gosh. I hope I'm well to go to my classes. It's the first week of classes right now. By the way, Defeat of Modernism, if you're watching this, I like your work. Keep it up. I think you kind of go too far in certain things. And, I just seek the truth, just like I think most people do. And I think that people like yourself, and there's other people that are similar in this context, they just, once they feel like the world, that they've been lied to so much, they start not being able to trust anything. And so, yeah, that's what it seems to be. Anyways, this right here is this was actually 2 years to the date of his death. This is actually when it took place. This image took place 2 years after he had died, not directly after his death. So, and they seem to say that he's like doing a blessing of some sort, which I could see, but also it could just be he's on fire because he's in hell. I don't know, But although out of the times that spirits have come sort of out of the fires of hell, they tend to be more intact as far as I've heard from other testimonies. They may be in hell, but they're not, what the bling bong of it? I'm drawing on here. Ooh-wee. I didn't realize that was a feature. Maybe it updated the software. No, it hasn't. I just never use it. I remember, because I try using it. It's just annoying. Anyways, where was I at? Right here, JP2. But I highly encourage people, if you want, to look at this guy's channel. He does have a lot of good stuff, although sometimes, like I said, I think he goes too far. Just, there's a good videos on his overall, like, the American founding from a Catholic perspective. I think that's pretty good. There's a lot of messianic, not messianic, what's the word? Freemasonry influence. When I was little, I used to wonder, is Freemasonry good or something? Like, I thought they were related to the Knights Templar. But the more I looked into it, I was like, these guys are demonic. These are not good people. And it's like most of our founders were highly influenced by it. I remember a few years ago, like 4 years ago, I was talking to this one guy about, he was talking about his Masonic Lodge. And I was like, oh, we were talking about religion and how it's extremely important, and I was trying to talk to him about faith and Catholicism, but he was just not really listening to me. And then he started talking way too much about this lodge, and he told me about the certain beliefs they had. I'm like, just thinking to myself, this seems very anti-God. Like, this is not okay. And I didn't say anything because I really didn't know enough. And then he eventually just got up and left, so I didn't get to talk to the rest of him about it. But in retrospect, I think this guy really, I wish I could have prayed for him better, but or at least convinced them, like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. I mean, like, yeah, sure, your dad and your grandfather did this, and who knows how long it's been going on, but like, you should not be doing this. You're like endangering your soul here. This is not okay. Yeah, but some of these stories are just really good. Like some testimonies on explaining the general judgment. It's always been hard for me to reconcile, like, how God can punish people forever in hell. And then you give the perspective of, like, well, actually, the judgment actually does make sense. I don't know if I'll go into it right now. Actually, I will. This video is long enough. Why not make it longer? So basically what I finally realized is, like, actually we do commit sins that are infinite. Like, once you realize that, yes, even though we are finite, we do impose wrath or sins that are infinite. If you kill someone, basically what you're trying to say to them is, like, if I could destroy you forever, I would. And I did. So you acted in a manner that basically says, I reject this person infinitely, and that person was created in the image of God, and you've disgraced his life, which was created by God. And so that's clearly a sin that's infinite. There's other sins that are infinite. So basically any mortal sin is fundamentally a sin that is not finite. Like in purgatory, you're paying for your egregious that you need to do penance for. But, like, it seems to me hell is the place where you're doing penance for things that are infinite in nature. So you'll never be let out of hell because your crimes are infinite and you did not have them forgiven by God. You did not repent to God at the time. And the only reason you stopped committing these sins is because of your death. What's basically God's like, look, you were given a certain amount of time to repent, and I offered it to you, and you just did not do it. And so there's one of the lines which is like, I will forgive all sins except the sins against the Holy Ghost. And I always wondered, what is a sin against the Holy Ghost? And I forget the lines exactly, but there's a certain passage about how basically, when I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. What you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. What you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. And so I forget, the Holy Spirit was in part of that line. Maybe it was the previous passage or the one after, but I don't remember it properly. Basically, it's like the idea is like the sins that the crimes against the Holy Spirit are the crimes against rejection of grace. And if you reject God's forgiveness, then then you cannot be forgiven for that. If you die in a state of ungrace, if you don't accept the grace, then that is a sin against the Holy Spirit, and this can't be forgiven. And so if you're in a state of non-grace, meaning you've committed sins that are fundamentally infinite against you and your neighbors and everyone else, including God, then of course you're going to spend eternity, suffering for these sins. And so in that context, it almost seems to me that purgatory and hell are nearly one and the same. In fact, they argue that Hades, which is purgatory sort of, will fall. Eventually Hades will be destroyed, and some other people will be let out, but the damned will be sent down into hell. So it almost seems that Hades is the same the location of hell is very similar to the location of purgatory as a place of penance, but the difference is some people's penance is finite, and so eventually they'll pay it off, and others are infinite and they'll never pay it off. So there's a different outlook. The people in purgatory know they'll one day be able to reach Christ, and so they're joyful that they're paying for their sins, even if it's excruciating. They know that one day they'll be able to be in paradise, but the ones in hell know that they'll never be able to do it, and so they're in just misery forever, and they're in constant agony from this. And from what I understand, the agony is knowing that they have lost heaven forever, and that suffering, the sins, are not explicitly the reason why hell is so miserable. It's the fact that they won't ever be with God. And there's another point that, like in the general judgment, the people that are damned know their unworthiness so much that they throw themselves into the fire. That, God is the ultimate judge. I don't know, here's a good experience. If you ever been with is the video still going? Let's just verify. Yes, it is. If you've ever been with ever want to talk to a really pretty girl that you care about or like, if you ever feel like you're not good enough for her or something like that, you always wonder, is this good? Should I be going after her or whatever? And you tend to put her too high on a pedestal, at least sometimes, and there's a good line which is you have to destroy the goddess that you see to find the actual woman in front of you, and that the goddess you saw may not be completely not there. It's just that that goodness is not fully manifested, and you saw, at least as far as it seems to me, you saw what she could be in the eyes of God, or at least partially. And you gotta, it's sort of like, at least for men, you have extreme judgment on a woman you care about is brought on you. You realize that somebody that is a high ideal for you is ultimately also a judge, and this judge is, you can't lie to it. It's not possible for you to lie. And God's the ultimate goodness, which also means He's the ultimate judge of you, and so you can see directly your own unworthiness of Him. And this feeling apparently is so intense that it's actually more painful than hell itself to these damned souls. So they throw themselves into the fire on their own accord, because they know that they're that unworthy. You can't lie to God, and His own goodness will be your own judge. So, which is why you can't go to heaven. Is like people in purgatory throw themselves into purgatory to be cleansed, because they know that they can't be with God in that state of impurity. So yeah, that's what I'll say. So thank you for that video. That was a good one. Anything else? I think I'll leave it at that. This guy's got a good, I think his Monarchy video was good. I forget where it is. It's really far down here somewhere. I think the video was from 7 years ago, so it's down there. Excuse me. If I go to I Miss Christendom, there we go. That's not how you spell it, but I'll find it. This YouTuber, also like him a lot. Think he's way more accurate, at least in terms of understanding. Vatican II is definitely in some degree valid. There's great evils that have been brought about by it, but you can't deny that it's, if I go back to the other guy's comment right here, he basically says hey, it really isn't, he's like, I do not believe that in the new mass miracles, or that demons are reacting to the new mass hosts. Who can prove these things? I'm like, well, you can listen to them and determine if you think their testimony is legitimate. So that's my reaction to that. Don't have faith. Men who lie and are immoral do not have faith. I think that you can have belief in God and sin. This is just blatantly obvious, because otherwise, why we'd have confession to the faithful. The faithful have confession because we still fall all the time. But yes, I agree there can't be changes to this. From what I understand, because I did watch one of the other videos, it seems to me that some of the original wording was heretical, but they changed it. And so, the reason why it was changed is because, these priests realized, hey, this is heretical, and so they changed it. But that clearly reveals that the people running the Vatican II originally were just faithless individuals who clearly are messed up. And I agree with this. Regarding the Jewish people, I prayed about this, and I get your point that technically at the end of the day, anybody who is not for Christ is against him. But of course, you can't say people are against you if they've never heard about Christ or they haven't been properly given a chance. We stopped evangelizing to people. Our generation just doesn't do this very much, and it's like we just sort of live and let live, which is not what we're called to do. And honestly, I do this a lot. I've tried, myself to talk about Christ to other people, and it's really hard. It really is. I don't know how to do it right, and I'm learning about this, but I have so many Jewish friends just because of where I grew up. A lot of Jewish and Muslim guys, just because where I grew up, it was a very highly diverse group. I mean, like literally the population was 30% Jewish where I grew up. And, most of these guys I always thought are decent people who, they don't seem like they're satanic. I mean, like some people are like, okay, you are definitely not good. Atheist people who are atheist, I find appalling. And obviously, like certain Muslim groups, they are fundamentally saying demonic things. I mean, like if you ever look at, there's one of my favorite Christian apologists, unfortunately not Catholic, but he was very good at defeating, Islamists' arguments. Unfortunately, he deleted his YouTube channel in I think a really silly decision. But he thought that he could delete his channel and then help other creators more or whatever. I'm like, you could just do this and just not upload videos. Your videos are really good and you should not delete them, but whatever. I saved some of his best ones before he deleted his channel, though. He has, but yeah, okay, what you said here is definitely accurate. I don't know about this particular biblical. I gotta look this up. I don't know what this version of the Bible is. I always use the New American Translation just because. Okay, the first complete English language Catholic Bible. I thought the New American one was retranslated because I heard that the original Catholic translations were not translated. They're translated maybe in haste, and this is the reason why they were not proper. But if I find out that this is a more accurate translation, I'll probably have to ask one of my good friends, a very holy guy. He's actually getting married this summer, so I've been invited to his wedding. What was that? So I'll ask him about. I know he has a copy of a very good translation. He's like, yeah, this is basically the most accurate translation that they have. So I'll ask him about that. But overall, where was I going with the? Oh, well, I guess I have two tabs open. Whatever. Yeah. He's like, telling the truth is not hatred. It's just sometimes truth first. That's 100% accurate. I agree with you on that. And, I don't think people should pay for the sins of their father, at all. So, should pay for the sins that you've committed. Maybe some Jewish ancestors of theirs committed sins against the prophets or even Christ. But I will agree. You did talk to another guy on the same video, saying like, it wasn't Jews specifically, but all of humanity that caused. I mean, obviously it was the Jews, but we have the tradition of like, what's the tradition where you go ahead and you're like, basically we do the lines of the public at during Easter. I forget what that's called. Damn, I gotta remember the names of these things. But the priest reads off the lines of Pontius Pilate, and I guess someone else reads the lines of Jesus. Well, we as the public declare crucify him, right? Because we have to recognize that he died for all of humanity, because he did. He didn't die only for the Jews. And so in that context, it wasn't just the Jews that crucified him. It was us, all of us. Obviously, it was the Pharisees that told the Romans to have him crucified, but the Romans crucified him just as much as we did. They had no issue killing just another Jew. They would have done it to any other one. The Romans obviously have killed many Christians, and in the history of the world, the Jews have not killed very many Christians. It's mostly been Well, it was the communists, it was the Romans, and obviously the Muslims. The Muslims have way more to answer for, and it's very clear that it's just a false prophet, and that fundamentally Allah is is the devil. There is no doubt about this. If you look at his attributes, they are literally Satan. Like, I am the king of deceivers. Like, what is this? Or the fact that when he came out of the cave that he was supposedly approached by Gabriel, that he's like, he can't tell the difference. He thought it was a demonic spirit, and he was convinced by his family that it wasn't. I'm like, bruh, and then there's a chapter where he's somehow put under a spell by a mystic, and he couldn't tell the difference that he was under a spell of the mystic. So it's like, okay. Not to mention that he even has a testimony. He's like, guys, if I'm misleading you, I'll die by having my aorta, my main life vein, cut off. And how does he die? He dies from being poisoned. And he spends the next several chapters of, the Quran sign, it doesn't matter. He spends the next several passages explaining I'm in great pain, my aorta is being cut off, my life veins being cut off. And so he dies in the exact fashion he prophesies that he'll die if he's being heretical. It's like, what? I mean, it's like, yeah, it's just stupid. I mean, there's just, it's so, the funny thing is, if you look in the United States, the number one religion that is dying the quickest, the one that is losing the most amount of people, is Islam in the United States. And it's because they don't have the suppression of information. It's just they're imams that have been telling these lies to them. They'll often tell why Christians are wrong, or whatever. They'll give gospel accounts of look, this is what the gospel says, look, the Christians are wrong. They literally make up shit in the gospels. They don't even give the right records. And people have really started to recognize this when they come to Western countries. There's a reason why Islam will probably not take over here. If I were to predict the destruction of the U.S. or any number of Western countries, it'll come from communism or some, satanic, Freemasonry cult or some sort of thing that will cause depravity. I don't see it coming from these guys, even though historically they have caused the most death to Christians. It's just that it seems that they actually do want to seek God. They just have been told lies about how to seek him. And in that context, are our religions all Abrahamic? Well, no. I mean, clearly they don't worship God. They worship the devil. But I think they all have been tricked into believing he's God. And so in that context, they do want this. It's really much more easy to convince a Muslim guy that you should seek God than it is to convince an atheist. In the same context, it's way easier to convince a Jew that Christ is Christ than especially a Jew that's left the faith, because a lot of Jews do leave the faith, and those people are easy to convert to Christianity. I think a lot of Jewish people tend to be obstinate, because even though they know there's holes in what they've been saying, I think they just are look, we've kept this faith and we've been persecuted for thousands of years, which they have, and not without reason sometimes, but sometimes it's been way worse than it should be. I don't think you should be murdering them or anything like that. That's not good. And I think they should have, maybe not citizenship rights in a good Catholic nation, but they should at least have, I don't know, you should not kill people. That's definitely not okay. No genocides is bad, it's evil. Anyways, so I think this concludes this video. We're still rolling. We are. Am I editing any of this? Probably not. There's not a lot to this video except me ranting for 54 minutes. All right. If anyone watches this, thank you. Yeah. Have a blessed day and everything, and pray for me. I'll pray for any people watching this channel, and hopefully I feel better and I can go to school and write my book that I've been planning to write. Bye.